Advanced AI has scanned every known Anunnaki text from ancient Mesopotamia. The results are disturbing. These weren't just myths about gods. The AI found precise instructions buried in the tablets, step-by-step processes for creating humans from genetic material. The ancient Sumerians wrote about beings who came from the sky and needed workers. They described mixing blood with earth on specific dates. The AI connected fragments that were separated for centuries. What it assembled reads like a manual, and it's making researchers question everything about our origins. Thousands of years ago, before the pyramids, before Rome, before anything we now call modern, people in ancient Mesopotamia looked up at the sky and believed they were not alone. They believed there was a family of gods watching them. They called them the Anunnaki. The name itself meant something powerful. These weren't just random deities scattered across myths. These were beings born from the heavens, the noble children of the stars, and they were everywhere in the stories carved into clay tablets. The Anunnaki first appeared in Sumer, in the heart of what's now Iraq, around the 3rd millennium BCE. They weren't just worshipped, they were feared, respected, and written into everything. They sat at the center of the world's oldest belief systems. They were said to control the fates of humans and the order of the universe itself. There were many of them, but some stood out. Enlil, who ruled the air and held the top seat among gods. Enki, or Ea, who governed water, creation, and wisdom. Ninhursag, the goddess tied to earth and fertility. Sin, the moon god. Shamash, the blazing sun and the force of justice. And Ishtar, who was called Inanna in older stories, the fierce goddess of both love and war. Each one had their own temple, their own worshippers, their own city. In the old stories, the Anunnaki were more than just powerful. They were like a council of divine rulers. In one tale called Enki and the World Order, they meet like elder judges to decide how the world should run. They weren't distant, they were involved. They sat together and decided destinies of people, of kings, of entire cities. They weren't just imagined into being. They were written, line after line, pressed into wet clay by people who believed these gods had real control over their lives. But their image began to shift. As time passed and new cities rose and fell, Akkad, Babylon, Assyria, the Anunnaki changed with the stories. In the early days, they lived in the skies and brought prosperity. But later, especially in Babylonian myths, they moved deeper, into the underworld. They became judges of the dead. They didn't disappear. They just changed roles. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, when the hero's friend Enkidu dreams of death, he sees the Anunnaki sitting in the shadows, deciding his fate. In the Descent of Inanna, the goddess dares to visit the land of the dead, and it's the 7 Anunnaki who stand before her, cold and final, deciding if she should be allowed to leave. They were still the same gods, but now they were older, darker, and rooted in the realm beneath the earth. Different people told the stories in different ways. For the Sumerians, the Anunnaki were tied to the heavens. For the Babylonians, they belonged to the world below. For the Hurrians and Hittites, they were ancient gods who had once ruled but were cast down after younger gods took over. Much like the Titans in Greek myths, their identity was never one thing. They were a shifting mirror, reflecting the fears, hopes, and questions of the people who wrote about them. But for all their presence in myth, the Anunnaki weren't worshipped as a group. No temples were built for the Anunnaki as a whole. Instead, each god had their own place. Enlil had Ekur in Nippur. Anu had the Sky Temple in Uruk. Enki's home was the Abzu Temple in Eridu. Inanna had her shrines in Uruk, and later in Nineveh. Each city had its favorite. The term Anunnaki was more like a name for the divine family, used in stories and sacred texts, not in everyday rituals. They weren't a religion on their own. They were the thread that ran through all the others. What made them unforgettable wasn't just power. It was presence. The Anunnaki were always there, in the sky, in the river, in the courtroom, in dreams, in death. They sat in judgment when life ended. They chose the fate of kings before they were born. They whispered in the wind, shimmered in the moon, burned in the sun. They were gods, yes, but not distant ones. They were woven into the structure of the world itself. For the people of Mesopotamia, these weren't just stories. They were the way the universe worked. Long before our modern calendars, long before anyone spoke of heaven and hell, long before the names we know filled temples or books, there were stories carved into clay. And those stories, some over 3,000 years old, didn't talk about a garden or an apple or a snake. They talked about gods who were tired, gods who worked hard and got sick of it. And instead of fixing the problem themselves, they decided to make someone else do the work for them. That someone else was us. The first tale comes from the Atrahasis epic, written around 1700 BCE. It wasn't a bedtime story. It was a warning wrapped in myth. It starts not with humans, but with gods who were exhausted. The lesser gods, the Igigi, had spent countless years digging canals, planting crops, and breaking earth. They were builders, miners, farmers, and one day they'd had enough. They burned their tools and marched to the house of Enlil, the chief god, demanding a way out. They didn't want to work anymore. So the higher gods gathered. One god, Enki, who was known for his wisdom, had an idea, a dark one. He said they should kill one of their own and use that god's blood and flesh to make a new being, a servant. Something smart enough to handle the work, but simple enough to stay obedient. It wasn't just talk. They actually did it. A god named Auilu, sometimes called Ilawala, was chosen. He was sacrificed. Nintu, the mother goddess, took his blood and flesh and mixed it with clay from the earth. She shaped the first human. When it was done, she cried out, "I've done everything perfectly. You killed a god, and I used his inspiration. I've removed your heavy work. I've placed it on man." The gods were pleased. The humans would dig, plant, build, and bleed, while the gods finally rested. The drums of work would beat forever, but now someone else would march to them. It's one of the oldest creation stories we have, and it's not about love or light. It's about labor, about making man from divine blood and dirty clay, and then handing him a shovel. The story even gave rules for when the ritual had to happen, on the 1st, 7th, and 15th days of the month. The gods wanted precision. This wasn't just myth, it was ritual. Almost like an experiment, step by step. And it wasn't the only one. Another story comes from Babylon, from the Enuma Elish, written down around 1100 BCE, but based on even older stories. It starts with war. The gods were fighting. Marduk, the hero god, went up against Tiamat, a chaos dragon, and her army led by Kingu. Marduk won. He split Tiamat in half and used her body to create the sky and the sea. But he wasn't finished. The gods had a problem. They still didn't want to work. So again, the answer was blood. This time, it was Kingu, the defeated general, who was killed. His blood was mixed with earth, and from that, humans were made. Same message, different God, same clay, same purpose. Humans were created to take on the burdens of the divine. The text doesn't hide it. It says clearly that men were made so the gods could rest. The gods had temples to be built, sacrifices to be offered, work to be done, so they made humans do it. Marduk gave the command. His father Ea, the same god known as Enki in other stories, helped carry it out. And when it was done, the gods blessed Marduk. They gave him 50 names to honor what he had done. One of those names was Nibiru, which meant the star at the crossing of the heavens. Some later called it a planet, but in this story, it was a symbol of order after chaos. Both the Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish are just two versions of a much older idea. There were even earlier stories, like one found in the ruins of Nippur. That one, sometimes called the Eridu Genesis, also spoke of gods making humans from clay. And at first, humans lived close to the gods. But then came the flood, and everything changed. These stories didn't flatter us. They didn't say we were made in anyone's image. They said we were made from leftovers, from blood spilled in rebellion, from tired hands passing the work down, from divine exhaustion and earthy mud. But in those ancient lines scratched into tablets, you can still feel something else, a strange kind of honesty. These weren't stories meant to comfort. They were trying to explain a hard truth, that maybe we were never meant to be heroes. Maybe we were just meant to build, to bleed, to carry the weight the gods no longer wanted. For thousands of years, the old stories were lost. The clay tablets that held them had been buried deep in the ruins of ancient cities, forgotten as empires crumbled. Sumerian and Akkadian, the languages they were written in, had disappeared by the 1st century CE. The cuneiform writing itself was unreadable. No one living could even guess what the symbols meant. The words were there, pressed into the clay, but the world no longer had the key. It wasn't until the 1800s that people began digging again. British and French teams raced through what is now Iraq, which was part of the Ottoman Empire at the time, searching for clues of the ancient world. Then, in 1849, something extraordinary happened. British archaeologist Austen Henry Layard was digging in Nineveh, the old capital of Assyria, when he found a treasure no one had seen in over 2,500 years. It was the library of Ashurbanipal, a royal archive with tens of thousands of clay tablets. They were stacked, stored, some broken, some whole, all covered in tiny wedge-shaped signs. Layard packed up what he could and sent it to the British Museum. By the early 1850s, over 20,000 fragments from Nineveh were waiting quietly in London, untouched and unread. At first, no one knew how to read them. Scholars only had one small clue: the Behistun inscription, a giant carving in Iran with the same message written in 3 languages, including Old Persian. That helped a little. Slowly, researchers like Henry Rawlinson copied and compared the symbols. By 1847, Rawlinson had mostly cracked the Akkadian cuneiform system. The door was beginning to open. One of the people stepping through it was a young man named George Smith. He was just an assistant at the British Museum, assigned to sort through piles of tablets. There were more than 15,000 fragments from Nineveh alone, each with pieces of stories, records, laws, myths. Smith had a rare gift. He could spot matching pieces by eye. He could see the patterns. He began putting the broken stories back together, one shard at a time. In 1872, while going through a group labeled Mythology, Smith saw something strange. There was a boat, a mountain, birds being released. His hands began to shake. It sounded just like Noah's Ark. What he held was Tablet Kebin of the Epic of Gilgamesh. As he read more, he found a broken line where a dove was released and returned. It matched Genesis almost exactly. Smith was so overwhelmed that he reportedly jumped up and ran around the room. On December 3, 1872, he read the translated flood story to the Society of Biblical Archaeology in London. The newspapers picked it up right away. They called it the Chaldean account of the deluge. The public was stunned. A flood story older than the Bible had been found. The Daily Telegraph was so excited that they paid to send Smith back to Mesopotamia. In 1873, he returned to Nineveh and recovered more missing lines of the flood tale. Then, in 1876, he published the Chaldean account of Genesis, a book that made these ancient stories available to everyone. Smith also translated the Enuma Elish that year, the Babylonian creation story. Other scholars joined in: Henry Fox Talbot, Edward Hincks, Julius Oppert. Together, they began unlocking the ancient world. Soon, myths that had been lost for over 2,000 years were being read again. The Epic of Gilgamesh, the Descent of Inanna, the Sumerian king list, the Eridu Genesis, the Atrahasis. These weren't just poems. They were glimpses into the first stories humans had ever written down. A whole new field was born: Assyriology. It focused on these tablets, the Sumerian and Akkadian languages, and the gods they described, the Anunnaki. While the words were being translated, archaeologists kept digging. In the early 1900s, the University of Pennsylvania's team went to Nippur, one of the oldest Sumerian cities. They found even older versions of the flood and creation stories. At Ur, another ancient city, British archaeologist Sir Leonard Woolley made a claim that shocked the world. In 1929, while excavating deep under the city, his team hit a sudden 8-foot layer of clean clay. There were no artifacts in it, just thick sediment between two layers of human settlement. Woolley said it was from a massive flood. He believed this was the proof, physical evidence of the ancient flood stories. The newspapers went wild. People believed archaeology had found the biblical flood. Later research showed that it was likely a local river flood around 2900 BCE, not a global event. But at the time, it felt like the ancient myths had come to life. Even now, the connection between the stories and the earth beneath these cities still raises questions. Then came the Sumerian king list. It was a short text, but what it said was astonishing. It described kings before and after the flood. Before the flood, it said, there were 8 kings who ruled for 200 years. The first 2 alone ruled for 64,800 years. After the flood, the reigns became normal again. Historians say the numbers are symbolic, not real, but they show what the Sumerians believed: that once, before the Great Flood, godlike rulers walked the earth. The myths hinted at a golden age when the Anunnaki ruled directly, and the line between gods and humans was not so clear. By the mid-1900s, most of these texts had been translated. The stories of the Anunnaki, of Gilgamesh, of creation and destruction were no longer buried. They were being studied in universities, printed in books, and read around the world. The Epic of Gilgamesh became known as the oldest epic in history. The Enuma Elish helped explain where many later myths came from. The Atrahasis gave a raw, honest view of how early people thought humans were made, and why the gods brought the flood. It started in 1968, when a Swiss writer named Erich von Däniken published a book called Chariots of the Gods. He suggested something wild: that many ancient civilizations didn't build their wonders alone. Maybe they had help, not from gods, but from aliens. He only touched on Mesopotamia, but it was enough. People began to wonder if the old stories weren't myths at all, but memories of something real. Then, in 1976, a man named Zecharia Sitchin took that spark and turned it into a fire. He wasn't a trained historian. He was born in Azerbaijan, moved to the West, and studied ancient texts on his own. That same year, he released the 12th planet. It was the first in a long series called the Earth Chronicles, and it changed how millions of people saw the ancient world. Sitchin said the Anunnaki weren't just gods in old stories. They were real beings, flesh and blood, not from Earth, but from a planet far away. He called it Nibiru. He said the Sumerians knew about this planet long ago, and it wasn't part of the normal lineup. It wasn't one of the 9 known planets. Sitchin counted the sun and moon too, so to him, Nibiru was the 12th. He believed it had a long oval orbit, taking 3,600 years to go around the sun. Most of the time, it stayed far away in the dark edges of the solar system. But once every few millennia, it came close. That's when things happened. According to Sitchin, the Anunnaki came here from Nibiru about 450,000 years ago. They weren't visiting for fun. They needed something. Gold. Lots of it. He said they were trying to fix Nibiru's atmosphere and needed gold to do it. It wasn't written in any ancient tablet. This part came from Sitchin himself, but he ran with it. He said the Anunnaki landed in Southeast Africa. Zimbabwe, he believed. That's where the oldest gold mines were. 2 leaders came with them, Enki and Enlil. One was more curious, more kind. The other was strict. These weren't just names in stories anymore. In Sitchin's world, they were rival commanders of a real mining operation. The lower-ranked Anunnaki did the digging. They worked for thousands of years. Then they had enough. They rebelled. Just like in the ancient story of Atrahasis, where the lesser gods got tired of hard labor. Faced with a crisis, the leaders made a decision. They wouldn't keep forcing their own people to work. They would create new workers. They looked to Earth's native creatures, early humans, maybe Homo erectus or Homo habilis. Sitchin said the Anunnaki had the tools to change them. They mixed their own DNA with these hominids and made something new. A hybrid. Someone smart enough to follow orders, strong enough to work. They created Homo sapiens. Us. That, Sitchin said, is what the ancient stories were really about. The clay mixed with blood in the Sumerian myths wasn't a symbol. It was a record. A memory of genetic engineering. He pointed to the Bible too. The line that says, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness." He believed it was the Anunnaki, plural, talking about the Adamu, the first man. In his version, Enki was the scientist who made it happen. Enlil didn't like it. Enki wanted humans to learn, to grow. Enlil wanted control. When humans got too loud and too many, Enlil sent a flood to wipe them out. But Enki warned one man in secret and helped him survive. That man was like Noah, or Atrahasis, the same flood, just told with different names. After the flood, which Sitchin placed around 11,000 years ago, the Anunnaki helped humans start again. Farming, writing, kings, the first cities. That's why, in the ancient Sumerian king list, it says kingship was lowered from heaven after the flood. He said it wasn't poetic, it was literal. The gods came down and handed power to their chosen rulers. He even believed the Sumerians knew about planets like Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. Things we didn't officially discover until the 1700s and 1800s. He said the Anunnaki told them. One artifact in particular, a cylinder seal known as VA-243, became famous because Sitchin claimed it showed the Sun with 11 orbiting planets. He said that was proof, a 12th planet, just like he said. But when experts looked closely, they said he got it wrong. The seal didn't show the solar system at all. The so-called Sun wasn't even the Sun. The symbols weren't planets. It was just ancient art, not a diagram of space. Sitchin kept going. He said the Anunnaki eventually fought each other. There were wars on Earth. He believed some of these wars turned nuclear. When he read old texts describing destruction and an evil wind that killed animals and people, he said it wasn't metaphor. It was fallout, radiation. He connected it to the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. He tied it to the fall of the Sumerian city of Ur. According to him, the final disaster came in 2024 BCE, a nuclear strike, a civil war between alien factions. It was a dramatic claim, one that placed a world-ending blast just 4,000 years before our own 2024 AD. Historians didn't buy it. Archaeologists, Sumerologists, and astronomers began picking apart Sitchin's work. They found problems everywhere. He wasn't trained in ancient languages, but he still made bold claims about words like Dingir, which usually meant God or sky. Sitchin said it meant pure ones of the blazing rockets. Experts said that was completely made up. He redefined words to fit his story. He said Nibiru was a planet far beyond Neptune, but in actual texts, Nibiru often referred to Jupiter, or a place in the sky where planets crossed. It was poetic, not a physical world. Scholars checked his quotes and found that he'd leave out parts or twist meanings. He'd take a word that meant one thing and give it a new purpose. Michael Heiser, a professional in ancient languages, even challenged readers to check Sitchin's translations in real Sumerian dictionaries. Most didn't match up. By the time the 21st century rolled in, the dusty clay tablets of ancient Mesopotamia were no longer silent. They had waited for over 4,000 years in museum drawers, behind glass, buried under layers of time and translation. But now, something had changed. Machines had entered the story. Not machines of war or industry, but lines of code, neural networks, scanners, and algorithms. Quiet things. Digital eyes that could read what human eyes had missed. For the first time, the gods of Sumer and Babylon were being heard all at once, not by scribes, but by servers. Museums all over the world had guarded these tablets for decades. The British Museum alone held over 100,000. The Louvre kept around 12,000, while others sat in Berlin, Chicago, Pennsylvania. Piece by piece, they were now being digitized. The Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative had scanned over 300,000 of them, uploading images, transcriptions, and transliterations into a massive open database. You didn't need to be an expert anymore. If you had internet, you could ask these tablets a question. The entire Mesopotamian record, once locked behind crumbling clay and scattered across languages, could now be searched like an ancient web browser. And that was only the beginning. At the University of Chicago, a machine learning model was trained to read cuneiform. It looked at thousands of tablet images and started recognizing the wedge-shaped signs with surprising accuracy, about 80% correct. Another project called Fragmentarium acted like a jigsaw puzzle solver. It looked for matches between fragments found in different places, sometimes decades or even centuries apart. A tablet found in Syria in 2010 might finally be matched to one found in Nippur back in 1900. The computer didn't care about time or language or who had published what in which country. It just looked for patterns, and it found them. But then something even more unbelievable happened. A team at the University of Hamburg developed a 3D scanning technology called NCI. In February 2024, they tested it at the Louvre on old Assyrian tablets still sealed inside clay envelopes. These tablets hadn't been touched since around 1900 BCE. The scanner read through the outer layer without opening it. The words inside were still there, still waiting, and now finally visible. It was like shining an X-ray through time. With all this new data coming in, scholars started using AI not just to translate, but to understand. Natural language processing, the same kind of technology behind voice assistants and chatbots, was turned loose on the ancient record. One team asked a simple but powerful question: what do all these texts say about the Anunnaki? And then they told the AI to find every mention of them, from myths to receipts, from prayers to god lists. The data came pouring in, from the earliest Sumerian sources around 2500 BCE to Babylonian copies made in 500 BCE. Myths, incantations, temple logs, anything with a trace of those old gods. But the AI wasn't just hunting keywords, it was looking for strange combinations, quiet echoes, buried patterns. Maybe 4 tablets from 4 corners of history all mentioned the same 2 words near each other. Maybe no human had noticed, because one was published in German in 1900 and another in French in 2010. The AI didn't care. It could see them all at once. And when it did, something began to emerge. Over and over, in different centuries and different cities, a strange image repeated itself. The gods wanted to create humans. And to do it, they used blood. Not just any blood, the blood of a god. They mixed it with clay. In the Atrahasis myth, the gods say, "Let Nintu mix clay with his flesh and blood. Let that same god and man be thoroughly mixed in the clay." In the Babylonian Enuma Elish, the god-king is executed, and his blood was then used to create man. For mainstream scholars, this was symbolic. Humans are part earth, part spirit, mortal but animated. A way of saying we are both low and high. But for others, those drawn to the fringes, this sounded like something else. To them, blood didn't mean poetry. It meant DNA. It meant genetic material, a record of something literal, a being cut open, a substance taken, a creature shaped. They pointed to the lines that said these new humans were made to work, to take over the hard labor of the gods. The stories didn't hide it. That was the point. The humans were created to be workers,